Very mindful of where we're actually at as well, actually. You know, we're in one of the most celebrated, I suppose, universities in the world. And by extension, this is one of the most celebrated cities in the world. Which means, and are you all students at the university? Any non-students here? Okay. But, so I mean, just the sheer, so the vast majority of your students, just the sheer fact that you are here at Oxford means, and a student at Oxford University, means that you are, you know, you're not ordinary. Yeah? You're quite extraordinary. You're quite brilliant in that way. And yet, paradoxically, when I was thinking about this, my son Yusuf is in the audience here, and yeah, I'm his father. I'm going to think he's brilliant. I'm going to think he's extraordinary. But the truth is, he's just Yusuf. Yeah? Sorry. Yeah? He is. I mean, I think he's brilliant, but he really is just Yusuf from Manchester. And that's the thing. You know, I have, as you mentioned, I have worked with, you know, CEOs, political leaders, charity leaders, community leaders, police chiefs. I've worked with, trained with all of them. And when you get to know them, they really are just, you know, normal people who have actually been put into extraordinary places and then needing to perform, needing to deliver on this power that they've actually been given. And I've been told this phrase has to be kind of incorporated in all kind of university speeches. With great power comes. You see some Marvel fans in the room. Yeah? Now, what you have to think about, though, is when that line was delivered by whom? Uncle Ben. To Peter Parker. When Uncle Ben delivers that line to Peter Parker is just this young, talented, just about, you know, discovered his talent, still designing his onesie in his bedroom, has acquired great power, has no idea what to do with it, has learned he can climb up walls, and all he's managed to do so far is, you know, send everyone else up a wall. His uncle's dying in front of him, which we find out a little bit later might possibly be due to his actions or inactions, as the case may be. You know, his aunt's in crisis, New York's in crisis, and he's now needing to step up and take, with that power, that responsibility. And life's going to do that to you. It's going to do that to Yusuf. By extension, more likely to do it to you because of where you are and where you've studied and what you'll emerge from Oxford with. But the reason we're here today is for you to, I suppose, understand that, look, being brilliant isn't leadership. Being articulate isn't leadership. You know, being a nice guy, nice girl isn't leadership. You know, being ambitious isn't leadership. They're all good things, but they're not leadership. And we just want to unpack, well, actually, what is leadership? What is that veneer you add to what you're doing in order for your good leadership to emerge? So you can apply what it is that you've learned, and with that power, take that responsibility. So what I'm going to do is to start off with, just to kind of, I suppose, let the model kind of reveal itself. I'm going to go through some slides where I'm going to talk about people of influence. Now, I'm not for a moment suggesting you're leaders. Some of them absolutely are. Some of them may not be. Some of them are good leaders. Some of them are not. So the first few slides I'm going to go through, I'm going to be trying to highlight things that are missing in the influence. I'm not going to use the word leadership now. Things that are missing in the influence of that individual at that moment in time, just to kind of help the model actually reveal. Because that's what leadership is. Leadership's three things: influence, relationships, and change. You have a change you want to bring. In order to do that, you need to leverage those relationships, which means you then need to influence those people in order that a change can actually be delivered. So there are three, I suppose, big kind of areas when it comes to leadership in terms of what leadership is used for. So let's look at this then. Elon Musk. I think SpaceX is floating on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Yeah. So it could quite possibly be that he is the world's first trillionaire on Thursday, depending on how that float actually goes. So I'm not actually showing these people here to say these are not people who are, they're not successful. They're very successful in their own way. But I wanted to show you what's missing at those moments in time when they show up in a certain way. So he shows up at CPAC brandishing a chainsaw. Does anyone remember this? It wasn't that long ago. Has zero understanding of how he's coming across and the context in which he's actually now presenting himself in. He has so actually he was given the Department for Government Efficiency, DOGE, to run. A context he's not familiar with, because remember he's private sector, moving it to public sector. He had a staffer on his in his team who had a social media handle of big balls. Others who had no recollection of if they were even interviewed for the role. Okay, he falls out of love with this man who he spent $250 million getting elected to become the president of the United States. It was no time before he was then being sued by a number of states in the US. Okay, it was a failed project. It was miserable the way that actually ended. Why? Because he had no understanding of how he was coming across. He had no understanding of the context in which he was actually now operating or trying to operate. That's not to say he wasn't excellent in a different context. So about understanding the context that you actually find yourself actually in. The former prince on the top there, for some strange obscure reason, decides to do a Newsnight interview, has zero idea of how he also is coming across, trying to defend himself by saying, I couldn't have been there because I don't sweat. So, it's about trying to understand how you are being seen by the people that you yourself are then trying to influence. So he clearly was not influencing anyone in the way that he actually thought it would actually be perceived. I don't think Liz Truss's budget needs too much of an introduction in this room. I'm sure many of us have been affected by it. Again, just not understanding the process by which, I don't know, I'm not an economist. Any economists in the room? Yeah, he probably waves as he ought to. So I don't know if actually at a policy level the ideas may or may not have been legitimate. What I do know, because I'm not an economist, what I do know is the execution was where it was poor. The fact that the Office for Budget Responsibility was not even engaged before such an important move was actually made. The pound crashes, the stock market crashes. We're all still suffering the interest rates in the country right now because of it. Again, just about lack of understanding. And anyone recognize this guy on the bottom? You have to be my generation perhaps to recognize it. Yeah, you could probably do. Yeah, Gerard Ratner. He, when I was growing up, was the founder and CEO of the largest chain of jewelry stores in the UK. And for some reason decides to stand up in front of the Institute of Directors. And when he was asked the question, how do you actually manage to sell your things so cheap? Says, why? Because the stuff I sell is total crap. Wipes out £500 million off the company. The company goes bust very, very shortly after. Why? Because zero understanding of what he should say and when he should say it, and if it should even be said. So what's missing? What was the common thing that's been missing with all of these people? Insight.
I think that they try to influence others. So they try to influence others without actually knowing how they perceive themselves.
Yeah. So insight, perception, self-awareness. Correct. All of that is absolutely correct. Which I'm going to group as understanding. Insight, perception, awareness is understanding. Okay. So that's the first dimension when it comes to leadership. Let's talk about these people. I think some of them don't need too much of an introduction. Harvey Weinstein, again, doesn't perhaps need too much of an introduction. a man of significant influence, ran one of the largest film studios in Hollywood, which was a cesspit of poor misogynistic practice. Epstein, I think we all know about Epstein, a man of significant influence, a man of significant connection, significant resource, but taking advantage of the most vulnerable in society in the most evil of ways. Enron, you all might know of Enron. So is it Robert Lay? I'll call him Mr. Lay. Mr. Lay, great ethical statements on their walls. No, great ethical statements in their, in their accounts and in their books, but zero practice. Stealing from people's pensions caused the big crash. A significant lack of a moral compass. And, oh gosh. Elizabeth Holmes, thank you very much. You guessed that. I forgot the name. Elizabeth Holmes. Anyone know about Elizabeth Holmes? Okay. She invented a piece of kit which you could take numerous blood tests with from a drop of blood. Okay, so as opposed to having to take one vial and do one test, one vial and do maybe a couple of tests, this is one drop of blood, and you could do numerous tests with it. So the theory actually went. In practice, the kit never worked, and she knew it. The world's first female billionaire. Okay, so Silicon Valley absolutely loved her. Articulate, knew what she wanted, understanding, but zero moral compass. Caused an awful lot of harm. Theranos was the name of the company, and again, just to go back to Marvel. Are you a Marvel fan?
I kinda.
You kinda? Yeah, you'd think with a name like Theranos, we should have seen it coming, the few Marvel fans in the room know what I'm talking. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, okay. Okay, so what's missing? What's missing in this case?
Morality.
Absolutely. Ethics. Second dimension of good leadership. Is Kodak even a thing? No?
You can still buy like small cameras.
You can still. It's one of those kind of retro things you can buy now. Okay. So again, my generation, we grew up with Kodak. Kodak was everywhere. Okay. So Kodak, big in the largest photography firm in the world at that time. They invented, or should I say, let me correct that. One of their staffers invented the digital camera, presented it to the leadership, and the leadership looked at it and said, no, that's going to destroy our current business model. Because their business model was on films, digital camera, you don't need films, and the chemicals in order to develop those films. So if they weren't developing the films anyway, they still supplied the chemicals to the other people who were doing the developing. So their business model was chemicals and actually film. So this digital cameras is going to destroy our business model. So they chose not to adopt the very future they themselves created. And before you know it, about a decade or so later, they've declared bankruptcy. Just about not understanding that you have to look to the future and you have to understand, well, what is it that we're here actually trying to do? Blockbuster. Again, too young? They're too young. You remember Blockbusters? So when we were lads, we had to go down the road. If we wanted to watch a movie, we had to go in, we had to hire a video. I'm that old. We had to hire a video. Yeah, a VHS. Okay. And then watch it in 24 hours. If you were really kind of wealthy, you could have 48 hours. And then return it within that time window. Along comes this little company called Netflix, who originally did something not too dissimilar. They actually posted the movie out to you, but they actually decided to bill you in a different way. They had a subscription model. So actually you could subscribe, you could then request X number of DVDs, it was at least in those days, X number of DVDs, and you can keep them for as long as you want. As long as you then return them, then you can actually order your next DVD. And Netflix offered to sell themselves to Blockbusters for $30 million. And they got laughed out of the boardroom. Saying, not a chance. Okay. Blockbusters finds itself going bust. I think there's one Blockbusters left in Oregon in the US now, which is a tourist attraction. Again, because one of the other things is, it wasn't so much that actually I had to go and I had to pay £2.50 or £5 in order to rent the movie. If I brought it back late, there was a late fee. And the 15% of their revenue came from the late fees as opposed to the actual kind of rental fees. And that business model is what they thought was, what they were trying to preserve. Along comes Netflix. Now, one shop left in Oregon in the US, and Netflix is worth, $300 billion today? Okay. Just about not actually understanding where it is that you're actually going and what it is that you're actually doing. And then again, Theresa May, I think, was handed a poison chalice, to be quite frank, when it came to when she became Prime Minister post David Cameron after the Brexit vote. But leaders need to be able to let their followers know, let their team know, where is it that we're heading. And it's not that she wasn't an extremely intelligent individual. It's not that she didn't have a good work ethic. She was a hard-working woman. But she just could not figure where it is that we're heading. And if you remember, what was the famous phrase that they had in terms of Brexit at the time? Can you remember what?
Get Brexit done.
Get Brexit done. And Brexit means? Yeah, Brexit. What would Brexit means? Brexit. What's that even telling us? Brexit means Brexit. Because she herself didn't know what Brexit meant. It was just too complex a thing. If you're going to have a border between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, you're going to have a problem. Yeah. If you're going to not have a border between Southern Ireland and Northern Ireland, you're going to have a problem because anyone can travel in from Europe, come across, and so it was a poison chalice. It was a no-win situation. At that point, you need someone who is strong enough to understand this is where I'm heading, and I'm going to make those hard choices, but this is the direction we're actually going in, and push it through. It won't make you popular, but actually that's what was needed at the time. It's a little bit like, again, love her or hate her, Margaret Thatcher did that, and had other issues because of that. But she knew where she was heading, and she forced her agenda. Whether you agree with her agenda or not, beside the point. The point is, she knew the end game, she knew the purpose, and she forced it through. And that's what was necessary for Brexit. But the dithering is not something you can do under those no-win situations. You just got to know that you're gonna upset someone. Okay. So what's missing?
Vision.
Perfect. Purpose. Yeah. And we'll talk. I'll give you the language of vision in just a little bit. So vision is your purpose realized. So when someone actually says vision is actually what does it look like if my purpose has been realized? That's vision. And lastly, to uncover the 4 dimensions at least. Gordon Brown. I'm just thinking now, age-wise. Gordon Brown, Premiership? Yes? Yeah, okay. Without a doubt, probably the most intellectually prepared Chancellor we've actually had to become Prime Minister. Okay, he understood economics, he understood policy, he understood the way the world worked, probably better than anyone who came into that office before. But he just was not able to articulate it well. Likewise, Keir Starmer. He has, if you look through everything, he has done some good stuff. And he does seem to have some idea of a direction. But nobody's got a clue what it is. He's just not able to communicate it well. And again, it's really important that if you've got your understanding, if you've got your purpose, you've got your direction, if you've got good ethics, that you're actually able to articulate it and get it across to people. Okay? And there's a classic time where Mark Zuckerberg had to give evidence to the Senate. And again, this became a great big meme. He just came across like an alien, like a robot. And for someone who invented a communication platform which was as powerful as Facebook actually is, the irony is just devastating if you think about it, that he just was not able to communicate effectively. So I mean, this is the easy one. What am I referring to here? What's the dimension? The missing dimension? Communication. Okay, so now we have 4 dimensions: understanding, ethics, purpose, communication. Sitting in 3 domains: the domain of self, the domain of others, and the domain of the context you're actually in. Okay? You have to be able to lead yourself before you can lead others. You have to be able to lead others in individuals before you can lead well in a wider, more complex context. Okay? So 3 domains, 4 dimensions. Enter stage left. The 12 characters essential to good leadership. Okay. And I'm going to talk about these now one at a time. You've got the inner master, the empath, and the oracle in the dimension of understanding. So the inner master in the domain of yourself, managing yourself well, understanding yourself well and managing yourself well. Understanding others, the empath. Understanding context, the oracle. Okay, and we'll just unpack all 12 of them one at a time. Yeah. So let's talk about the inner master. I know who I am. An inner master is connected, is grounded. They understand their personality. They understand their strengths. They understand their weaknesses. They understand their reason for being. Oh, sorry, I'm not starting with a master, I'm starting with an advisor, aren't I? Okay, so actually that's a good point. So here's the thing. This is the only one where I'm going to start with communication as opposed to understanding. I remember I changed the slide. Why? Because for inner master to even exist, you need an inner advisor. So the inner advisor is the voice in your head. Now we all have one. And the point here is, how mature is that inner advisor? Are you firstly attuned with your inner advisor? Can you hear the voice in your head? And secondly, is it a mature inner advisor, or is it an inner advisor that is just self-justifying? Telling you what you want to hear. You've already made a conclusion, and it just then justifies why you're acting the way you're actually acting. So you can have a cheeky professor, you can have a immature inner advisor, or you can have a mature inner advisor. And a great example here is Viktor Frankl. Arrested 1942, sent to Auschwitz. He was an Austrian psychologist, and in this hell on earth, he discovers, or gave language to at least, something that affects psychotherapy even today. So he's lost his freedom, he's lost his family, he's lost his work, and he discovers there that between stimulus and response, there's a space. And it's in this space that you actually have real power. And famously in his book, it's a great book called Man's Search for Meaning. Anyone read the book? Anyone come across the book? Essential reading for all of you. Man's Search for Meaning. It's a long-standing bestseller. In it, he uses the phrase, because obviously he's in Auschwitz and being brutalized in Auschwitz. He says, I can't affect what it is that you're doing to me. What I can do is affect how I feel about what it is that you're doing to me. And that's where the real power actually comes. And that's your inner advisor. Okay? So do you have a mature inner advisor? Do you use that space between stimulus and response? Okay. And the inner advisor is essential for the inner master to work. So my apologies, I jumped to inner master first, but the inner advisor is where we start. And it's the only one we're going to start with communication, because the way the eye normally works and the way we read, we go from the top this way. So I'm going to be then, for the other domains, I'm using understanding as my start point. And the model's been created that way for a reason. So then, just to steal my own thunder, inner master, I know who I am, etc., etc. Grounded, able to use that space, use that stillness that the inner advisor can give you, and then use it well in terms of what actually comes out the other end. Isn't just a delay between stimulus and response, as we talked about with the inner advisor, is actually then being processed. And what comes out the other end is a well-managed response. And it's the foundational piece when it comes to even emotional intelligence. Because when we talk about emotional intelligence, we talk about understanding yourself and managing yourself in terms of the first two foundational levels of emotional intelligence. So this is understanding self, managing self, the inner master. And a very famous example of this, and again, he used that term, stillness, when he would actually talk about 27 years in prison. And he came out good to go. He came out knowing who he was, knowing what he wanted, knowing where his strengths are, okay? Mature enough and sensible enough to understand that post-apartheid South Africa is still a rainbow nation. And you have to be very comfortable in your own skin, given the brutality that you've actually been through and your people have been through, to come out and say, look, I still know that this is the right thing to do. Because it's me and my identity that's actually going to drive us there. That takes a certain inner master to be able to come out having had the kind of experience he actually had. So we've had the inner advisor, we've had the inner master. So now we have the inner referee. The dimension is ethics. The domain is self. Okay? And so this is understanding your own values base. Now, what I don't want you to do is get hung up on the semantics on this. I really don't. I'm not attached to the language, whether you call them an inner master, an empath, an inner referee, a conductor, a custodian. It's not about the language. That just makes the book and the model, it gives it some form. All I want you to understand is it's the domain of self and it's ethics. So the 4 dimensions, the 3 domains, and you're there. We're going to make it a little bit more complicated a little bit later, but you're kind of there in terms of that ingredient. Just understand the ingredient. There is your own personal vault of values, and that's what the inner referee actually is. Do you know what your right and what your wrong actually is, and why it's your right and why it's your wrong? And again, often an area where there's a bit of confusion in this one is whether they are values that you are living or whether they are values that you aspire to. Okay? And I suppose the inner referee we're talking about here is the former, not the latter. Is which ones are you actually practicing? Which ones do you wear in your sleeve? Which one do you think are so important, okay, that you're going to wear them out loud, you're going to extrovert them, because they're that good, you want everyone else to also be affected by them. Okay. The example I've chosen here, and I'm sure there's many examples we could use, is Malala Yousafzai, an alumni of this university as well. Yes? Shot in the head on a school bus because she was advocating for girls to have the right to education. Now, if you read her book, she talks about she was still scared afterwards. When she had continued the mission, she was equally as scared. But she knew it's still the right thing to do. Okay, and do you know you're right? Doesn't mean you won't be scared, doesn't mean you won't be challenged, doesn't mean you won't fail in the pursuit of it. But do you know what it is that you're going to hold on to, despite all the odds? And dare I say, do you actually know which ones you're going to trade? No? Your values, interestingly, the word is values. So each of your values has a value, and you give the value to your values. Yeah? I might value harmony over justice. You might value justice over harmony. Both are correct. It's just that you're giving the value to one, I'm giving the value to the other. Okay, so do you know which ones that you value? So now we're in the domain of purpose. The dimension of purpose, but the domain still of self, the inner visionary. Do you know where you're heading? Do you know what you want, where you want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Not something that your organization wants you to do and the direction your organization is going in, what your parents want you to do, and where your parents are wanting you to go. Do you know what your own purpose? Where is that you want to head? And this is the inner visionary. By having clarity of that sense of purpose. Russia invades Ukraine. The US immediately offers Zelensky a ride out. And he says, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. That's someone who knows where he wants to be and where he wants to go. Okay? I think he could have been excused for taking the ride, especially with a superpower like Russia. But he was so aware of his inner visionary that to this day we know what he's been able to do in terms of holding off such a superpower. So that's the inner domain. So let's move to the domain of others, the dimension of understanding. This is the empath. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that the inner master was the foundation of emotional intelligence. This is the second stage of emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence talks about understanding yourself, managing yourself. Understanding others, managing others. They're the four dimensions of emotional intelligence. So the inner master combined with the empath is the essential conversation of emotional intelligence within leadership. Okay. Now, empath isn't a soft thing. Empath is real intelligence. This is intelligence about another person. To be able to put yourself in another person's shoes, see the world from their view. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to be able to see it. And the ultimate empath that I chose here from my generation again, she was called the People's Princess. And she was called the People's Princess for a reason. She knelt down at a child's level when she was talking to a child. She sat on hospital beds and held the hands of AIDS victims at a time when people thought you could catch the disease through touch. Everybody deserves to be valued was one of her kind of famous catchphrases. She was loved so much by people of different cultures. Why? Because she was able to show what empathy actually looked like. And people gravitated towards her because of that. So empathy is a critical leadership skill. In fact, all of them are critical leadership skills. But it really is one of those quite high up there in terms of its... And it makes sense. If I said to you what that leadership is about influence and leadership is about relationships, well, empathy is a critical key to both of those things, if you think about it. Oh, have I jumped ahead too early? Okay, never mind. The mentor. Now, this isn't the mentor in terms of helping someone achieve their purpose. This is the mentor in terms of building another's character. Okay, we're in the dimension of ethics and the domain of others. So it's about character building, people building in terms of the ethical dimension. And Desmond Tutu was a great example of that. Again, post-apartheid South Africa, to facilitate and navigate people through the peace and reconciliation commission where someone had to sit opposite the very person who may have brutalized their family and to find a pathway to hearing the truth from there and then providing the forgiveness from here. And not forcing anyone to do it, but facilitating the process of character building from both sides. Okay? Great mentor in practice. And again, one that is perhaps undervalued a lot in leadership as well, because this one takes time to show results. Okay? And it's about building the ethical character of others and the moral characters of others. And so now we do have the navigator. The navigator is about helping others achieve their purpose. Opening doors, providing networks, providing resources, facilitating success, facilitating other people in order for them to achieve the purpose that they want to achieve. So this is the dimension of purpose, the domain of others. And Muhammad Yunus is the example that I use here. Grameen Bank. Sound familiar? Some of you, yes. Some of you, perhaps not. Won the Nobel Peace Prize for helping millions of people, mostly Bangladesh women, but internationally too. Spotted that what they needed was just that little bit of assistance. Okay? No bank was willing to offer them any funds. He gave them microfinance and skills in order for them to set up micro businesses without any capital, without any collateral. Had a massive repayment success. So it was a sustainable model. Helped over 1 million people. Okay, and I said won the Nobel Peace Prize for it. That's all about helping others achieve what it is that they wish to do. And then this is the storyteller. The silver tongue. Being able to articulate well. To be able to, I suppose, the communication dimension is there to give language to everything else. So the inner advisor is giving language to that inner master and giving language to that inner referee and giving language to that inner visionary. Same way here, the storyteller is giving language to the other characters within the model. But be able to say it well, say it clearly. It's not just about the words, it's about the body language, it's about the tone. But just to be able to make sure that the message you want to give hits. And again, I'll give you two examples here. What was it? We will fight them on the... What was it? We will fight them on the beaches. We will fight them on the landing grounds. We will fight them in the fields and in the streets. Yeah? At a time when the world was thinking that Hitler was going to win. And there was massive pressure, as we know, peace in our time and all the stuff that came just before it in terms of the appeasement. You could almost be forgiven for being in the appeasement camp because this guy's winning. Let's just agree some kind of terms so we can hang on to our identity in some way. But no, despite the fact that actually there was so much tide going against standing our ground, he was able to articulate well. He had the silver tongue, he articulated well, and he managed to persuade people. In the same way, Barack Obama, extremely well known for his ability to communicate. Yes, we can were the first 3 phrases that we heard from him in terms of being able to articulate it well. Yes, we can, and a little known senator becomes the first black president of the United States. Okay, and now we're moving to the wider context. Now this is often the domain that people believe leadership belongs. But I hope I've actually shown you that you need to be able to lead yourself first. Without that foundation of the inner domain, without the connective tissue that the others domain actually gives you, anything in that wider context domain is just, it's empty. It's like moving pieces on a chessboard, and it's hollow. You have to be able to have the foundation and the connective tissue so that you perform well in the context that you actually find yourself in. And again, we're talking about context before I kind of move into talking about the oracle. It's really important to define your context well as well. The system that you're choosing to operate in. Now we're at Oxford University. So Oxford University could define itself as a leading university in amongst other elite universities. Now, if that's how it chooses to define its context, it puts it in the same playground as, Princeton, Stanford, MIT, and others. Or it could choose to define itself as a leading university within the universities of the UK. Because it is both. But which one does it choose to define itself as? The former puts us in the playground I just mentioned. The latter puts you in a playground with Huddersfield. And your strategic decisions, everything hinges on how you define your context. So it's really important for you to define your context. Are you a community organization that's local and that's good and powerful? Or are you a national organization? Or are you an international organization? Are you grassroots or are you political? Really important for you to define your context and define it well, because then you know who it is that you are engaging with properly and what your strategic responses and your strategic decisions actually will be. So defining context is super important in order that you make the right decisions. So context, domain of context, the dimension of understanding is the oracle. Have you defined your system? And do you understand the players in those systems? Do you understand the connection between the players in those systems? If I was to make a change here, it's a little bit like a waterbed. If I make a change here, can you see what happens there? Are you able to see that connection and understand the complexity within the system that you've defined yourself to be in? And it's really important not just to know the players, but it's important to know the relationship between the players. 1 + 1 can equal 2, but 1 divided by 1, 1 minus 1, they all give you different answers. So it's important to know the connection between the two as much as it is important to know the actual players themselves. The example I use here is Angela Merkel. Very rarely the loudest person in the room, but almost always the one who knew what, when, and where. Navigated Europe even through Brexit from the other side. The Russian threat on Europe, the Eurozone crisis. 16 years, I believe it was, she was leading Germany. Okay? But she was without a doubt a woman of immense understanding of the context she was actually in. The custodian, the dimension of ethics, but in the wider context. So are you a custodian and a steward of the principles and the ethics of the context you actually find yourself actually in? Are you leading your sector to somewhere wholesome, or are you leading your sector to somewhere which can be somewhat dangerous? Okay. An important thing to consider. I think to celebrate his centenary as well. Sir David Attenborough, a custodian for something that can't speak for itself. Blue Planet, which was the documentary series, changed global policy on plastics. And he's 100 years old and still custodianing, still working. And that's a real custodian at play there. The architect, the domain of purpose, wider context. about building your context, your organization, your sector to be more purposeful in the future. A wider vision for your sector, a wider vision for the world, a bigger foundation upon which for others to build. Yeah. Tim Berners-Lee built for us the World Wide Web, and knew for it to be achieving what we needed it to be achieving, it had to be given away for free. And how very different is that to where we actually find ourselves in sometimes today? Okay. And that's the architect at play. That's someone who's understanding that actually the future of the wider context is not about protecting that one thing that you or I have actually discovered. And then the last one here is the conductor. Being able to broadcast, being able to communicate wider, not just on a one-to-one basis, but understanding social media, understanding how to broadcast wider in terms of your communication strategy. Giving a voice to the ethics, giving a voice to the navigator, giving a voice to the empath, being able to articulate that well. And I give the example here of Jacinda Ardern. And if you look to see how she handled the shootings in Christchurch, there was 6 words: they are us and we are them. And the way she was able to broadcast that across every platform. When she visited the victims of the mosque shooting, she put on the hijab herself, okay, and was made a point of being seen in that way, hugging the family of the victims, and then she articulated, they are us, we are them, and she purposefully broadcast that as far and wide as she possibly could, okay, which is a conductor at play. So there we are. We have 4 dimensions, 3 domains, 12 characters. And we've already seen what happens when some of them start playing with each other. So when the inner master played with the empath, we start achieving things like emotional intelligence. There's models around political intelligence, which you often see, where understanding meets ethics. And so what then happens when they build on each other? Because when they work together, they are more than the sum of their parts. And this is actually where it gets a little bit more interesting. Because when understanding, for example, meets ethics, we get the virtue of prudence. So we talk about the 6 virtues in the book. There's prudence and courage. Prudence and courage. There's social and spiritual, and there's wisdom and justice. So understanding meets ethics, which gives you insights, and a person of insight who's actually able to execute with principles is the prudent practitioner. When communication meets purpose, you have the courageous practitioner. Okay, so someone who knows where they're going, but actually is able to articulate well and able to influence people even when the going gets tough in order to achieve that purpose. That's the courageous virtue revealing. The social practitioner is one with deep understanding, so they're informed, but then they're able to articulate that well. So connect with people at a human level, at a worldly level, at a social level. The spiritual practitioner, ethics meets purpose. Okay, so someone whose moral compass is so aligned with where it is that they're actually going, that everything they do has meaning and has integrity. The spiritual practitioner. Then you have wisdom, you have justice, which is ethics meets communication, and you have wisdom, which is understanding meets purpose. Okay, and I'm not going to go into them in detail. You have to read the book. Everyone can go away with a copy of the book, no problem. In order to kind of look at them in a lot more depth. Now we take a very kind of Aristotle approach to this. When it comes to good leadership, it's all or none. You can be a great communicator. And what does that mean? It means that you're a great communicator. Yeah? You can be a stand-up bloke. And what does that mean? It means you're a stand-up bloke. Doesn't mean you're a good leader. To get the qualification, my hypothesis, to get the qualification of good leadership, it's all or nothing. And that's not to say wisdom isn't a good thing. But wisdom without justice is just wisdom. It's a little bit like when you read Macbeth, you have the three witches. They were very wise, three witches. Okay? Didn't mean that they actually had the ethical thing. We saw earlier the example of Elon Musk. That was courageous what he did. But courage without prudence is blundering. So then we talk about the vices that come along with the virtues. So the absence of prudence reveals blundering. The absence of justice gives you dangerous. And so we explore the vices in a lot more detail, and then we explore the blind spots in a little bit more detail as well, which is, not the complete absence of prudence, but maybe the absence of one or two of, or one or the other of those dimensions. And so we unpack that a little bit more so that you understand that, look, if you don't bring all of it to leadership, you'll fall over. And you'll fall over like those first slides that I showed you, where, very smart people, people of influence, people of network, people of resource, failed in certain ways because they missed a dimension, they missed a character. And so it's important for you to develop all the characters in that way. So I'm going to bring it right back to where I actually started. You're, by definition, to be in this room and to be at this university, you guys are brilliant. And so the world, when it hands you, and it will hand you, when the world hands you that responsibility, you need to deliver on that responsibility, not in just a brilliant way, not in a way of someone who is ambitious but without the ethics, someone who has the depth of understanding of their industry but without knowing where to take it, who has a great moral compass but doesn't know how to articulate it and spread it. It's important for you to be able to do them all. And it's about the choices that you make now, not necessarily when you're given that corner office and that position. Yeah? It's the time to start developing these things is now. Yeah? So Zelensky made his choices in a besieged capital. Malala on a school bus. Mandela in his prison cell. Who else did we have? Yeah, in apartheid South Africa, in the worst of places. Viktor Frankl in hell on earth made their choices. So it's really important that you make your choices. You make your choices well. I'll leave you with I suppose this is just how we end the book, and I'll leave you with the phrase here tonight as well. Thanks very much.
I'll ask a couple of questions and we can move it to the audience if that's okay. You make a lot of references to pop culture, literature, and art more broadly in the book. Why is that, and what does it suggest more broadly about leadership?
Why is that? Let me answer that first. So my co-author, Maria. So Maria Pattinson is my co-author, and she's a theatre director. Now, I've been delivering leadership programs with Maria for many, many years. I never once for a moment thought that we would author a book together. So this book was developing in my mind for almost 2 decades. And life being life, work being work, I just couldn't find the time to, get it out of my head onto a piece of paper. And I remember Yusuf's in the room as well. So Yusuf was 10 years old. He was going to do his 11 plus. So we were doing some 11 plus papers together. And I'd leave him to do his papers while I then thought to myself, I'm going to have a go. So we were spending a whole day together in an office. I'm having a go at writing the book. He's doing his papers, and in between there I was marking his papers. By the end of the day, I'd probably written 1 page. And what was clear to me was that actually there's no way this book is going to get written at this pace. So I went looking for a co-author. I tried a ghostwriter, but the problem is by the time you've told someone what it is that you're actually trying to get them to write down, when they write it down, they just don't quite understand it. It didn't quite work out on a non-fiction book. I think ghostwriters might be great for fiction books, but on a non-fiction book, I'm not so sure it's a good idea, because you need to kind of have that depth of understanding of what it is, especially given that I felt I knew what I wanted to write down, and so if it didn't match, it didn't match. So then I had a thought, okay, why don't I ask Maria? So Maria did a master's in ethical leadership as well. She'd been delivering leadership programs with me anyway. She's a communication specialist, so she'd always come in and do the communication piece for us. She's not a writer, but then neither am I. And I thought, well, okay, let's see what we can do. She then did the first fix. I sat with her and I gave her all the material that I possibly could give her. She went away, she came back. We both hated it, I think, but it was down on paper. And editing something is just so much easier than writing it from scratch. And that was the process, so we were able to do that. So very much the reference to Shakespeare in here, so every one of the characters has a movie character, that's my influence, and has a Shakespeare character, that's Maria's influence. So that's where the influence of kind of the pop culture and the theatre has actually come. But leadership is leadership, and I think we were just talking about this, Yusuf and I think it was yesterday, where he was telling me about a director of a play and the way he saw this director actually working. And he was then articulating that actually I saw him do these things, and these resemble the characters you're talking about in the book. And I said, yes, of course they do, because leadership is leadership. And we tried our best. I think just because of our background, Maria's half Italian, half English. I'm Pakistan origin, British born. So we bring that diversity anyway. Very different backgrounds. I've got a science background. She's got an arts background. And we also very much try to ensure that the reason why we gave the language to the characters the way we did, the inner master, the oracle, the custodian, is we wanted to make them as archetypal as we possibly could, so that they could apply across culture in that way. So very heavily influenced by Carl Jung, myself as well, in terms of his psychological theory, and he obviously was big on the whole archetypes as well. So I was very keen to make sure that the language is as archetypal as possible. So it didn't matter if you were from Perth, it didn't matter if you were from Manchester, it didn't matter from Islamabad or from Peru. You recognised the characters, and so
That leads quite nicely onto my next questions. Do you think that the model can work cross-culturally across backgrounds?
I think I've just answered that. Yes, absolutely. And again, we purposefully try to stress test the model as much as possible in that way. There are, I suppose, linguistic things you have to be super mindful of. So again, I mentioned a model on political intelligence. So one of the leadership programs I actually deliver, we use this model on political intelligence, which includes, and some of you may have actually come across it, a wise owl, an inept donkey. I don't know if any of that sounds familiar to you, but there's the combination of awareness with integrity giving you the wise owl, but the absence of awareness and the absence of integrity gives you an inept donkey. And then you've got the clever fox and the innocent sheep with the absence of the other dimensions. And so I remember doing a leadership program in Pakistan, because I've been very fortunate. I've delivered the program across 5 different continents. And I remember the first time I delivered it in Pakistan, trying to get people to be convinced that you have to be a wise owl doesn't work culturally in a place like Pakistan, because the Urdu word is ullu, and ullu is not a good word. In Pakistan, it's quite an insulting word. Yes? Yeah, it's quite an insulting word. So trying to say to someone, no, you need to be an ullu, it doesn't work. Yeah. So we had to kind of make that into, the wise eagle, and all of a sudden, oh, well, yes, yeah, we don't mind. Otherwise, when I was talking about trying to be the wise owl, they say, no, we'd rather be a sly fox, thanks very much, So language, you have to always kind of moderate somewhat, but the model definitely fits.
Amazing. We'll now move on to audience questions, if you have a question.
Slightly personal. Have you ever considered running for office? In the sense of experience with a variety of charities, obviously an academic understanding of the pros of leadership. I guess has that thought ever passed through your mind? And if you have rejected that idea, what was your rationale?
Oh, wow. Has the thought ever crossed my mind? I think it might have done, probably, 15 odd years or so ago. I think I'd be lying if I said no, I hadn't considered it, but I think I did dismiss it quite quickly. I like working with people in office, but there's just so much to do in so many different sectors. I do feel number one, if I was to pursue one in that level of depth, I'd have to give it, full time and then some. Secondly, there are certain decisions you need to make when you're actually in office, which are just unforgiving. And I would much rather be able to influence a range of people to be confident to make those than actually just be that one guy who is making those, if that makes sense. So it wasn't a long reflection. It was quite quick before I thought, nah, it's not for me. The other thing about running for election is you have to, the whole process of getting elected, it's got nothing to do with leadership. That really is just about how popular you can make yourself and how well you can broadcast yourself. Now, all components within leadership, as we've talked about, I'm not for a moment saying they are bad things. They're really good things. You have to be able to influence people. You have to be able to articulate yourself well, and you have to be clear in that. But it's just marketing yourself. And that just isn't me. And I don't know if some of you were eavesdropping on when my wife, when we walked in, my wife said, why do you put the book in the back there? I said, no, it's just too much like marketing that is. And I just think, personally, that's just not me. I like to work from the shadows.
Any other questions?
When you were talking about purpose, you mentioned the code like a classic piece of like representation. And as is discussed in the discussion answer, it's really interesting to see like how that that destruction occurred. Do you not think that that's like a natural process of product development, that the incumbents, like the large existing firms, ignore the upcoming products just because there's quite a few of them that are good where they go, and they have less like potential. As you mentioned, Netflix was left outside out of the room. Do you not think that's a natural process?
It's a natural process if you're not willing to adapt and change. And I think that's I suppose the Uber archetype that governs that purpose dimension is the artist and the magician. It's the feminine dynamic. And that's not for a moment saying you shouldn't have the good king, which is the static masculine to go with it to give balance. But it's important you actually, especially in this day and age, in what you call a VUCA world, it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. You have to be able to be agile to be able to survive in that world. So you have great examples of organizations that have actually been able to show that agility, and then you obviously have those where the inertia just takes over and they just can't change their business processes. There's many of the latter. Then if you remember, was it MFI was a furniture? Yeah, MFI was a furniture store when I was growing up, and then along comes IKEA, completely different business model. Whereas you had to buy your furniture from here, ready-made, and it came 4 weeks after you ordered it. Whereas you go to IKEA, you pick it up and it's in the boot of the car, and you're bringing it home, and before the end of the day, you've assembled it even. And so organizations like IKEA with a complete different business model just can destroy organizations like MFI because they can't redefine themselves. But then you've got the types of, again, I'm going back, I'll have to show my age again. but we used to have these things called typewriters back in the day. So you'd put the paper in, and you type away, and if you made a mistake, you'd have to use the Tipex and make the correction. Then along come this thing called an electronic typewriter. Now, actually, wow. Okay, so you can do your typing, you can wait, you can read it, make sure you're happy with it, click enter, and then it prints it, bless you. And then it prints it. That's so cool. And then along comes this thing called the personal computer, which makes them both obsolete. Now, there was a company back in the day called Olivetti, went big on the whole electronic typewriter piece. Now, what was natural for all of the companies that were actually in that space was for them to say, okay, well, let's try our hand at the PC in order to adapt. What they were fortunate in, that actually because they were able to understand their core strengths, understand who they were, understand that we have to move and we can't just keep on this. Olivetti was one of the biggest names in electronic typewriters. They were terrible when it came to the PC, but because they understood what their core competence was, so they kept the what was good with the old, but they were made to be agile with the new. They realized actually it wasn't the electronics that they were good at, it was the paper processing piece at the top that they were actually good at. So they pivoted, having tried their hand at innovating into personal computers, they pivoted to printers, and they became one of the biggest brands in printers. And it's just about understanding that you have to go, the markets are going to constantly change, and you're going to get new players who are going to bring in mobile phones that don't have keys on them, I mean, and we're all used to our smartphones, but to actually have a phone that firstly I'm carrying around my pocket, and secondly doesn't have a single button. Now, I'm of the generation where, we went from this to buttons. So actually, buttons was the innovation, and to actually have something which doesn't have buttons is quite innovative for its time, and it's just about kind of understanding that we have to move from here to here and not just be kind of, and that was the death of BlackBerry, for example. They were very kind of well known for the way you would actually operate them with this great little keyboard that they actually had, and just not being able to pivot away from that fast enough. So it absolutely is something that natural wastage will take its course, but you also can, if you identify your core competence, pivot with the times, and you have to just have leadership for its time as well.
I really agree with you. It's really important to identify core competence, to actually understand where they're coming from, and then bounce off that. Like Honda, they realized that they were going to make small engines and all of those and stuff. But do you think that you can reach a point where you're too stuck? Like Kodak's, one of Kodak's strengths was they were they have little shops in a lot of variety of places. When Netflix comes along, they're completely destroy them. You don't need actual shops anymore. So do you think you can reach a point where you're too you have too much inertia and you're unable to change even if you want to?
Yeah, and that was what happened with MFI. For them to pivot from their business model to what IKEA, for example, was bringing to the marketplace, was so expensive they just didn't think it was worth it. And so it's about kind of doing that cost benefit, but doing it with deep insight and understanding the wisdom that combines the understanding and the purpose, the wisdom that actually gives you, as opposed to just understanding this is what we do, which is what they did, but not actually see the world is changing, and it's changing. The pace is also getting faster. So the world is changing exponentially, and it's getting faster and faster and faster. I mean, with the advent of AI, I do a module just on strategic thinking. We were having a conversation earlier that I tend not to particularly like doing short presentations. I like to take you away for 4 days in a room and work with you for 4 days. That's what I like doing the most, and that's what I do the most. But with that said, I do a short module on strategic thinking, just a morning with West Midlands Combined Authority, and maybe once every 3 months or so. And whenever we start talking about the part of strategic thinking about whether the world is changing and how you need to be able to analyze that, and how to identify where it changes and how to pivot with it, the conversation when we touch on AI, every 3 months is a different conversation. It's a complete, because AI is innovating so fast that it wasn't that long ago. It was barely maybe 3 or 4 sessions ago. So what would that be? Maybe 18 months or less than that, maybe 14 months ago. Whereas actually, I was saying to him, well, AI is now retail. You can have ChatGPT on your phone. Now, if I was to say to anyone, you can have ChatGPT on your phone today, they'll say, you've been able to have ChatGPT on your phone for, because it might only be a year, but it feels like it's been forever. I mean, generative AI is old. It's all about agentic AI now, and we know that's developing at pace too. So you have to be able to pivot, otherwise you will become obsolete. So agility. I mean, there's maybe I'm over answering the question here, but let me just keep going because that's what I do. There's a couple of thoughts when it comes to strategy. You've got well, not a couple of thoughts. There's a whole stream of thoughts. There's a great book called The Strategy Safari, which might be worth a read, which can talk about different schools of thought when it comes to strategy. But on one extreme, you've got the planned strategy, where if I came into a room, I'd work with you in terms of where are we actually at right now. We'll do an analysis of where we're at. Where is it you want to go? We'll do some visioning, see where you want to go, and then this is where we're at. This is where you want to go. What's the roadmap to get from A to B? That's a planned strategy. The complete opposite thinking, which is the thinking you need for the world we're in today, is you just have to be doing the strategic thinking piece around 3 things. Well, where is it you want to go stays, because you have to have that. So where is it that you want to go? Identify the system you're actually in, which was the conversation I talked about earlier in terms of understanding who your players are, what's the connection between them. And then the third piece is creative conversation. You know where you want to go. These are the people in the space that are relevant to you. Just go out and engage with them and talk. Because if you went out with preconceived ideas, you're probably missing the point. You want to understand where the space is and where the conversations for the future actually are, and what's he or she doing, where they're going, why they're going, and keep it agile. And that actually will help you not just move towards your vision, well, actually your vision will keep evolving as well as you go. That's why it's called the evolve strategy, because it evolves as you go. And this is the mindset we need. The agility is the mindset we need in this day and age, as opposed to just, and the idea is obviously to combine the two and everything in the middle, as opposed to just having a planned strategy. Because they say by definition, the day after you've started walking that strategy, the world's changed and you've changed, in which case your strategy's out of date. So the agility is the important thing in this day and age, and getting more and more important.
One more question, perhaps? I do have one final question. How does someone develop the characters in the model in practice rather than in theory?
It's all in the book. I didn't mention it actually. Maybe you should have mentioned it. So we have what we call the 4 L's of depth when it comes to these characters. So again, I've given you at 2 dimensions. I've actually said to you there's the domains and there's the dimensions. But actually, it's not a circle. It's actually more like a cake, a circular cake. And so there's layers underneath as well. So there's these 4 layers, the 4 L's we call them. And it's about bringing the whole body paradigm to it: heart, body, mind, spirit. So we talk about the first L is learn, understand the character, know what it is. Then love. Leaders have a passion with engaging with the world. And so enjoy the practice of that character. And that's the heart. So the first one was the mind, second one was the heart. Then we've got lead, which is walk the talk. It's not just about knowing it and loving it, but you have to then walk the talk. You have to do it, and that's the body. So we've got heart, body, and mind so far. And then the last one is live. So you've got learn, love, lead, live. And live is about making it habitual. So you do it so much that actually becomes a habit. So there's in the book there's some exercises to help you learn. There's some exercises to help you love, lead, and live. There's, if you go to goodleadership.org, there's some resources on there as well. I'm sure we have got a pipeline of more exercises and more ways of actually developing each one of the characters actually too. But there's definitely exercises and pathways in the book for you to follow in order to kind of bring it to life as well.
Perfect. Please join me in thanking